Donc, bonjour encore une fois.
Good morning again. This is our last plenary of the meeting already. And it's been 1.5 days that we've been talking about the climate crisis, the housing crisis, big challenges, the inclusion crisis, and all the efforts which are necessary in order to reach a true reconciliation. And we believed that it was very important to see how these issues would be faced on Montreal's island and to see how concretely the mayor has opened a door of possibilities during meetings yesterday, talking about the partnerships that already exist, but also about partnerships that she hopes will emerge in order to go faster, in order to fully understand the scope of the challenges that we face. For those that have seen and watched the electoral results yesterday, Montreal was quite different from the rest of the province. There is a specific or a peculiar experience to share on that. But I would like to introduce to you our moderator for this morning's session, Émilie. Émilie, she's a journalist at Le Devoir, at the Gazette, and she's also a columnist, an educator, speaker on public policies on equity, human rights, international cooperation, and gender or racial issues. She works for Power and Politics and Let's Go. These are CBC shows, and Power Play at CTV. She was published in different magazines, newspapers in English and French. And more recently, she won the 2020 Excellence Award from SOREP for the best essay for one of her stories written in the Liberté magazine, Revue Liberté. This is a must if you're interested in ideas in Quebec. So welcome, Émilie. It's Émilie Nicolas. We're very happy to see that you're with us again today. This is Émilie Nicolas, columnist, political commentator, consultant galore. Good day, everyone. Good morning. Is this working? Hello. Good day. So today, this is our last panel, our closing panel for this conference. Talking with the organizing committee, we wanted to tell you mainly about what was happening in Montreal. Jean-Marc was explaining this throughout my presentation. Well, I'm an active person. I participate in social movements in Montreal, and I've been doing that for more than a decade. And I spent a lot of years in the, working for the media, but I remember a few years ago we tried to have conversations about philanthropy, what it is now, how it was, and how leadership is gaining more momentum in the field of partnership. There are a lot of changes that are happening in the philanthropic sector in Montreal, notably about systemic change issues, social justice issues, the way the foundations can meet with such challenges in the ecosystem or not. And so I wanted to spend 1 hour with you to ask questions to panel members so that we can really understand that perspective, that historical perspective, so that we can know what is being told right now in the philanthropic sector in Montreal. Claude Pinard, here on my left-hand side, President and Executive Director, Centraide of Greater Montreal. Claude Pinard. Let's applaud him. This won't be a boring panel. Karel, Mayrand, CEO and President of Foundation of Greater Montreal, Fondation du Grand Montréal. Karel, Mayrand, and Sylvie Trottier, member of the board for the Trottier Foundation, Fondation Trottier, Sylvie Trottier. Good day, board director. So today we'll start with one question which is more general, and this will be directed to the three of you. Each one in turn, you may answer this. What is your vision about philanthropy? How can you summarize this? What is philanthropy? What type of animal is this? Good luck to the interpreter to translate this. What is this animal about? Do you hear me? Not yet. Test, 1, 2. Bear with us. Ladies and gentlemen, the microphone is fast approaching. Does anybody have a microphone that's working? Yes, does this work? Yes. Okay, I can start this discussion. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. This is a very important question. So in general, what is my personal vision of philanthropy? I wanted to share with you something that is some type of thesis statement that I've personally developed during the past years. I got involved in the philanthropic world on the Fondation Familiale Trottier. I'm a board director, member of the board. So what's my 3-step plan in order to try to change the world? This will be Franglish. I hope this is not going to be too hard for our interpreters, but I'll speak both languages mixed together. This is what I tend to do. Step number 1. This is how you give money. Philanthropy is all about giving money. That's the first thing that comes to your mind, right? You give money. And the first thing is that you may always give more. This is just one way of stressing the whole disbursement quota, which is 5% now. This is well known. This is something we can stress. This is one step forward. Right way to go. But another thing about this, it's the way you give money. The way you give. We've had a lot of discussions during the last day and a half about several of these questions. And philanthropy, for me, where it's heading, it's really about, can we go to the root cause of things? This is not just about trying to solve issues we see, which was the traditional approach about philanthropy. You know, we give money for food safety, maybe, for people who are violence victims and so on. Yes, this is urgent, it's important, but if we really want to have a different world, we need an approach that's more systemic, something that will aim at the root cause of things. This is something that may look too complex a thing, and
it seems too complicated, too big to look at these deep systemic issues, but we're facing massive crises. You know, there's the climate crisis that is becoming, you know, as present as ever. There's been a racial justice reckoning, you know, that's been going on for a long time, but really came to light in the past few years with the Black Lives Matter movement. Also, a call for reconciliation, again, has a long history in Canada, but with the murder of Joyce Echequan has come a lot more to the forefront. We have, in Montreal recently, violence that's targeting our youth. So there's all these questions that are urgent. You know, housing is a crisis, this is the economic crisis. It's not enough anymore to just say, okay, let's just give here and there. We have to be really strategic and use our lever to go further. You know, philanthropy cannot replace government, but we can play a role to go further, to be a lever, to be a catalyst, to take risks, to do things that others maybe aren't willing to do, and to convene actors together. So a couple of examples from our foundation would be something that qui a impliqué nous trois.
This is something that would have involved the three of us during the past 3 years. You know, there was a Fonds COVID Québec, the COVID Fund for Quebec, FPC. PFC played a very important role also in order to have a territorial approach regarding action plans, crisis cells, as we call them, as per segments of the Montreal region, which was impacted a lot, and also a bottom-up approach and a horizontal approach with the different stakeholders in the field, from public health, from the different boroughs in order to have an urgent approach. So the desire was to have a proof of concept so that this would be resumed by the government to have a public health approach which would be comprised of the community sector from the onset so that this would be taken seriously, be respected in the whole process. I could tell you about step number 1 more, but number 1, yes, giving better, and also something else that I wanted to say, to give to actors or stakeholders who are very financed, the grassroots people who demand radical change, require that a new world be created. This is not something that I will do wearing my Fondation Trottier hat, but I do this on a personal level. I'm lucky enough because I was born with a lot of assets. I have access to a lot of things. So I give control of the money to leaders from the community because I tell them, you know where the money should go. You know what the issues I give you, and I entrust you with my money. I trust you, and you know where the money should be invested. And we together will have a joint approach based on mutual understanding. That's one thing. Not a lot, of course. I mean, we need to push ourselves to do better in terms of our philanthropic endeavors. Number two, this would be the 5%, perhaps even more. If we dare go beyond that well-known 5%, then the remainder is a 95%. We have, well, philanthropy is about asking the question, do we have a way to look at things from equity? Do we have also a perspective on that for our donation funds and so on? And we can make progress there. There's a full spectrum of strategies. First, do no harm, as we say. Divestment, this is a very important movement. We can have also an impact-based approach. We may have approaches that have significant revenues, very good returns, and if we want to do good, we may not be able to make money. It seems antagonistic, but it's not true necessarily. There are approaches where we know we won't make as much return financially and so on, but we can create a lot of impact also. An example that I could show you is that our foundation and other ones, we were 9 foundations, we created a project which was called the SG Championship. So each foundation was part of this effort. We said, we will contribute with money with asset managers, but we want to be shown, you know, what they do. We asked them, what do you want to do regarding ESG? We wanted to use our power to push the standards even further, to go beyond. We wanted to be extremely disciplined in our approach. And so that's what we can do. That's an example of how we can use money directly, but how we can have influence because we have our own power with our donations, but with the money and the funds we have. That's number 2. And item number 3, the one which I like very much. Well, okay, we give money. With the money that we don't give, we invest. But then there's a whole matter about, well, of paramount importance. Why certain people, why certain foundations have that money first? There's a problem of fairness. There are 10 people in the world who have as much money as half of the world population. The top 1% has 25% of the wealth in the nation. This is not a sustainable model. We should not accept this model. We can change things a little bit, rebalance things out, and so we can continue working so that we can further things, so we can create some progress. This is clear for me. We've talked a lot about generosity. We want to be more generous, of course, but generosity cannot replace justice. It's no substitute for justice. We can't count on just a handful of people who encourage each other to give more. But basically, not everybody wants to do that. And nobody, or not a lot of people, want to do that in a fair and equitable way. We need fiscal incentives. The DQ was a tool. We need to tax the rich. That's something we can do, and we can survive with such a process. And this is also about the power matter. How can we, or how do we decide to do things with that agenda? The foundation's money, we should not forget this is money from the public also. So you have a 3-step plan, if I understood things correctly, to give better, to give more, number 1. Number 2, investing the funds in a way to consider the do no harm principle. And the way you invest, this must serve the mission. And thirdly, you need to redistribute the wealth. You know, you need to tackle the unfairness in terms of how the wealth is distributed around the world. Yes, 1, 2, 3, that's it. This can be written in a tweet, maybe. Yes, very simple. Thank you, super. Karel? Same question, general approach about philanthropy. Well, I will resume some of the things that Sylvie has mentioned from a different perspective. I am quite new to this world of philanthropy. I've been managing the Fondation du Grand Montréal for 2 years, and I had a certain knowledge of the sector because before that, I was on the side of people who were asking for money. What? Oh, these bad people, right? Well, I feel more comfortable today, more so than before. Anyway, what I want to say is that my education, when I was raised as a French Quebecer, the philanthropic tradition is not as strong in French Quebec. Before the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was no money, right? And so the little bit of money that existed, this was given to the church, to the state, or to the Caisse Populaire. And so the approach that I was taught myself as I was raised, being young, is that charity and social solidarity were in conflict, were antagonistic. In a traditional charity model, the person with wealth keeps control over their money, and they will give it to contribute to whatever causes are dear to him, and so on. In the social model, we tax the rich for redistribution. And there's another model, the philanthropic model, which is a traditional model based on charity. And when I got involved in the philanthropic world in Montreal, what I've discovered is that this is a sector that's being totally transformed, which intent is to tackle systemic things in order to further real transformation and not just be some type of comprised of philanthropic organizations that sign checks, and washing their hands off it, saying, well, I did some charity, I did what I had to do, that's it, no-brainer. No, I see leaders pertaining to the philanthropic world, and I like saying that I'm an honorary member of the Trottier Family Foundation, and I work with Claude at Centraide, United Ways, and with other foundations, and we feel that there's that intent. It's not enough to just redistribute philanthropic funds. It's not enough. What's the systemic intent behind that? The underlying intent. That's the interesting thing, in my own opinion, because we do have a certain leverage. We don't have all the powers, but we can influence the world. We can change it. And from there on, for me, what was clear also is that 100% of the asset must serve the mission. It goes back to what you were saying. What do we do? And I thought that, are we going to redistribute 2.5%, 3%, 5%? We've talked a lot about that. This was a missed opportunity because we could have asked ourselves, philanthropic money is invested in which way in this country? We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in this country that are invested without complying with certain criteria. We're not saying, how are these funds invested? Do they harm the environment? Do they go against Aboriginal rights for Aboriginal peoples? Is there child labor around the world that's encouraged that way? We don't know. And that's a problem for me because while we were talking about 3.5 or 5%, there's 95% of it which was invested. And I'm not saying, I don't want to generalize because there are a lot of foundations that really work hard in order to invest in an impactful way regarding ESG. For instance, we've developed a new responsible investment policy will bring down by 50% almost our greenhouse gas emissions. This is an impactful way to invest. We did a lot of things that way, but this was a fundamental transformation because before that, the investments were only used to generate returns. And then we signed checks and we believed we had done our work. But now we've adopted a new principle, which for me is the fundamental principle. 100% of the asset must serve the mission. This has an additional leverage effect because there's more than 400 million in assets under management while we redistribute 20 million per year. So the asset has reached another level of order of magnitude. So if we want to support systemic transformations, if that's our purpose, we should not think that philanthropy has a democratic legitimacy to act as if we were the state. We're not elected democratically. We're not a state. We can try to have an influence on certain things, but we have to do it humbly. we have to do it with humility and courage also, because courage was missing in the past sometimes. Because if we need to create systemic transformation, because there are deep injustice matters. I'm talking about climate injustice. There's injustice against racialized groups in Canada in terms of equity. There's injustice against Aboriginal peoples. We can't just sign checks. We need to shift things systematically. There's only 1/3 of people smoking in Canada. In the past, it was not like that. And this was thanks to huge campaigns, not just small campaigns for raising the awareness, but we forbid smoking in public spaces. That's how we made it. Advertising about smoking was forbidden. We did it thanks to that. You need public policies. Yes, indeed. Public policies need to change. And for that, the philanthropic sector must accept to support political plea activities and initiatives. I was involved for 12 years in the Ecological World Foundation, accepting to do that. There were just a handful of them. That was quite rare. And there were all sorts of rules about political activities that were quite blurred. I was audited, politically speaking. I was submitted to a political audit by the Conservative Party. I had to provide my agendas for a year and a half. All the written and verbal agreements had to be submitted. They were fishing for political activities beyond the well-known 10% that we're entitled to do, but not beyond that. But if you think about that, if you intervene to fight against policy, it's a political matter. If you intervene to fight against racial discrimination or inequality, it's a political deed. It's always a political act. Now, today, yesterday was the electoral end. And so we have the results, and so we are the day after. So we need courage. If we don't have a lively and solid, a rocket, powerful society to be able to create that change, 20 years from now, it's not going to change, because we've had people that have been militants. They do a significant work. They must be supported. That's one of the roles that philanthropy must play, to support these people, to create real change. Okay, Sylvie mentioned that we have the same idea about responsible investments. 100% of the assets must serve the mission. But this item about the plea, this is a new thing that we're putting on the table right now for our consideration in view of our perspective on philanthropic endeavors. It's one thing to utter these words. It's another thing to do something about it. There's a cultural shift that must happen. We'll get back to it. Claude, thank you, dear technician, for giving me a voice. I'm very happy to be here. This is my former PFC, FBC family. I was the leader of a private family foundation. You won't be surprised if I talk about collaboration, if I address philanthropy, because that is the key. We must try to tackle the different social issues. Nobody alone knows it all. No, we need the participation of philanthropic foundations, civil society, the government, different entities, different stakeholders. We need to collaborate together, and that is of paramount importance. We need to do it intensively, and we need to take some time to give ourselves a common definition about the things that we want to work on. A common definition, we determine a baseline, and we agree on the numbers, the initial numbers. I had a meeting with some cases that were manageable, but then we had a struggle about the percentage of social housing units that we should have in Quebec. There were disagreements. They were not aware about the SCHL forecasts. We don't even agree about the baseline. We don't even agree about the starting point. So no wonder we have issues later. I'm talking about collaboration. That's why it's important to work together. At Centraide, we've gone through different things. We've collaborated with 9 private foundations, with the city, Town Hall, Public Health, the Montreal Coalition of Table de Quartier, le projet d'impact collectif, the Collective Impact Project, which is a collective project, which is a lab about the new way to intervene at Centraide United Ways. This will have a great impact on how we'll go about influencing the future. This has a great influence. Why? Because the decision-making power, so that we can decide where the needs are, this goes back to the communities that we work with. This is a concrete example about how money can meet local needs. And so it's not Centraide United Ways in this time that proceeds with the analyses or manages things in terms of a municipality. No, it's the areas. Through a concerted action, they are called upon developing their own skills and knowledge, but they have to intervene about what their needs are in terms of the respective areas. One of the things I want you to remember, social changes don't happen fast. There's a reason why it takes some time, because generally social changes depend on how the majority acts.
What's important is to take this majority and bring it down to the neighborhood so that the majority in the neighborhood tell us, here's what we want to work on, here are the major issues today, what we need to tackle. And when we're speaking this way, it means that we start talking about the causes and not only the consequences. Sylvie was talking of a Band-Aid earlier. Of course, if you're going to being operated for an open fracture, you won't have a Band-Aid on your leg. When you fight poverty, it's what we're still doing. That's called charity, but we should be working upstream on the causes of poverty and not on its consequences. We should support the community organizations, United Way, but we need to start working on the causes, a systemic approach. We have a new theory of change that will be talking about the systemic causes. We absolutely need to do that, and all by ourselves we won't make it. When the city of Montreal in social development and with the investment it makes on behalf of the government, so the city is managing investments, but we are putting twice as much money as the city in social development. So you'll see that the city by itself can't do much. I'm happy to see that Ms. Plante was here to talk about collaboration. It's the only way we can get there. So the approach here, it's bottom up, of course. It's my vision of philanthropy. That's where we need to go. And we must absolutely consider the fatigue of the community organizations at this point. So if you want to launch a new project at this point, well, no, stop for 2 years. They can't do any more. They're out of breath, and there is inflation over and above that. But what's important is the basic funding. So the projects that you ask them to realize for you, well, the office that they're using needs to be funded. So we have a shortage of manpower, labor shortage in the philanthropic sector. So just think of the basic funding, and it will help you to get into a different kind of relationship. We're talking of a power relationship, but it helps the philanthropic organizations to put themselves at the service of the communities and not dictating them what they ought to do. So it's important to get this type of mindset from bottom-up approach and working on the causes. That's how we will make a difference. I want to make a comment about causes and effects and to conclude. So at Centraide, we are working on housing this year. So the first factor that tells us how much money you have for the rest of the month, it's what you're paying for your rent. In Montreal, 17% of people are paying more than 50% of their net income for their rent. So if you're a single-parent family, if you're earning like $30,000 or $35,000 and 3 children, you cannot pay a condo at $2,000 a month, of course. And going back to school was not pleasant this year. So I met a young man of 16 in the Saint Laurent. It was a meeting with the community organization. And he told me, well, the more the summer was going, the more the content of my lunchbox, I mean, the quality and the quantity were both going down. Well, I was expecting this kind of comment, but not the second sentence he added. But this year, I need to work 25 hours a week. So I need to give my check to my mother so that she takes care of my 2 brothers. So you're talking of dropping out. It's all tied to the issue of affordable housing. I conclude The lady, of course, will go and to the food bank on the 15th instead of the 28th. And this will develop anxiety because she's thinking about moving. And of course, for the child, it will be an uprooting. And this is creating even more anxiety in the life of the children. So we've just been through 2 difficult years, and this will add up. So this is the ripple effect of too expensive housing. So my vision of philanthropy, it's collaboration, everyone together, and all of you here, all of us here on the stage, we have some power. And it's not only the money, it's also the influence. You're talking of advocacy, I call it influence. We need to come together and have a common definition of the problems we want to tackle, develop clear objectives and evaluation method and KPIs to make sure that we are not only making plans, but a new thinking for our society. Yes, you may applaud, of course. I think it's also important what was just said, because I'm aware that we're talking of people from all across Canada, and at times people are not understanding the seriousness of the housing crisis in Montreal. But I think it's important to give concrete images of what the social reality is here in Montreal with the housing prices. I was saying it in the intro. Of course, Sylvie, you have a family foundation, but there's a renewal of the philanthropic foundations. Karel and Claude, you are illustrating the changes. I don't think that 5 years ago the Greater Montreal Foundation and Centraide would have presented things in the same way. So Claude, maybe right away, you are talking of a new theory of change. You're talking of systemic change. It's something new for Centraide. I feel that there is much more concern for social inequalities in Montreal and working on the causes, and also looking at the inequalities between the various neighborhoods in Montreal. How did you get there? What's the difference between the Centraide today and Centraide 5 years ago? This is a good question because it's important that we were doing some systemic work before that theory of change. But the idea is that we want to be more intentional on 2 or 3 major issues like housing for now. And the power or the influence we have and the credibility of Centraide is such that we are at the center of the triangle between the public, the private, and the community. And so the whole civil society, we can play the role of a convener on specific issues. And our theory of change, it's bringing people together for an inclusive Montreal without poverty. It's not as simple, but I mean the real difficulty is that when you look at plans and you look at what is being done in modern society, of course, there's a law on poverty of Quebec, but when you look at that, there is no intentional plan. It's because those issues are complex. So you need to subdivide that into more practical issues. And the first issue we've identified is housing. But really, the difference, it's all about the intentionality. We're continuing our basic work, our advisors in the field every day. We do the analysis with various organizations of the issues in our society. But what we're saying now is that we can broaden this consultation on specific issues. That's what we're doing with the major conversation we will have in Montreal in May. And the important aspect, and Karel, you will talk about it, but we are working with the Greater Montreal Foundation as 2 strategic stakeholders. And we will publish the something on the vital signs for the 40% of people who are disenfranchised about housing. So it's a collaboration between our 2 foundations. That will be a type of collaboration we'll promote for the future. Karel, the same question. In your foundation, what is different between what you're doing now and what was happening 5 years ago, and what kind of reflection happened, and more specifically, what led to that reflection? Well, 5 years ago, let's say, in the last 6 or 7 last years, we doubled our staff and our assets. So it makes things possible that were not possible before. And I'm surprised to see that they want to hire an environmental activist as their CEO. But of course, they had some reflection to give more intentionality precisely to the foundation. So since I'm there, we have a new strategic plan, a new mission and vision statement, and we are trying to describe our values, our organization, and to describe the kind of Montreal we want to become real. So I won't quote it all by heart, but it's important. And we added the issue of the climate crisis, so that with the Trottier Foundation, we launched a Climate Montreal partnership. So as a community foundation, it's important that we include issues and that we work on issues that maybe were not considered as much by philanthropy previously. And as a community foundation, we have like 750 philanthropic funds created by individuals and organizations in health, education, and culture, most of them. So as we looked at that, we said, so what's not being covered? What are the causes? Which are the populations that are not being supported? So we looked at diversity and inclusion, and the struggle against inequalities and the climate crisis were the three causes that we could support with our own funds. So, of course, when you say that, it raises the issue of collaboration, because with our own means, we don't have an impact to bring systemic change. So we need to look for other partners to do that. But in 2020, we said, in 2021, so 1 year ago, in September last year, we adopted a new strategic plan that states that from now on, for our own funds, we will have one fund for climate crisis, one fund for social equity, and in all our grants, half of them, 50% of our grants in value and in numbers, will go to populations in need of equity. So, and we include the racialized populations, the immigrant population, the women, the question of gender diversity, and persons with various deficiencies. So that's what we said in 2021, and already this year we reached our objective. More than 60% of our grants were paid to these populations. We're a smaller foundation with, well, important means, but we are agile enough to do it. And if we are agile and can do it, and don't do it, who will do it? So when we develop a vision about what we want to do, we are intentional about realizing it. So on those three issues, fighting inequalities, diversity and inclusion, and the environmental issue, we made important steps that would not have been conceivable 5 years ago. So about it, we're proud of what we have been doing, and we're trying to open a new road. We don't have huge means, but contrary to Centraide, which has a very important role in the ecosystem, of course, if Centraide would decide overnight to change all that they're doing, it would destabilize the whole ecosystem. We're a smaller stakeholder in the ecosystem, so we can change things practically overnight in 1 year, and without, instead of destabilizing, we're becoming like a catalyst. So I would like to ask Sylvie about that. You said that most of the funds are focusing on more traditional causes, like health, education, and culture. Very often we tend to give to causes that are, let's say, safe spaces in philanthropy, issues that seem less political, But as we said, everything is political. So how can you bring the philanthropic environment to invest more in causes that would be less conservative? So we were talking of inclusion, climate change, and more advocacy. How will we lead the sector to give more importance to those issues? This is a key question because we have a duty of responsibility to go precisely in this direction. So I can see the trend, but obviously it's not the majority of foundations that are there. So we have a great deal of work to do about it. And I would say that there are different factors that would inspire our sector, like first, the urgency of the crisis. I mean, it's quite obvious, I mean, for many people who've been concerned for a long time, but maybe the philanthropic sector was not as directly involved in those difficult realities. But with the social movement we've seen in the last years and the pandemic that brought to light the inequalities in a way that just can't be ignored anymore. So it was clearly a storm, and no, we were not all in the same boat, and it was obvious that we didn't all have the same experience of the pandemic. There were difficult questions that were asked of the philanthropic sector as well. So it comes from different sides. So we had a session at the beginning of the forum, so we had more academic criticism. Several books were published, so like winners take all. So these kind of serious questions asked of philanthropy. So too often you're just under the radar. So not everyone is understanding the power and influence we can have, and maybe people were not asking enough questions. But now we are explaining more clearly what we're doing. This will bring uncomfortable questions and challenge our ways of doing things. But in my opinion, this is important, and not only important from a moral point of view, but also simply for the sake of efficiency. So everybody involved in philanthropy, of course, wants to do good. Of course, we are looking for a better world and more justice, and we have beautiful visions. But if we want to get there, we need to listen to those criticisms and really change our ways of doing things. And there are practical examples we see in leaders that have implemented these kinds of decisions, like the trust-based movement. Well, and it's a movement with studies that show that it works. Of course, I will repeat myself. Oh, what's happening? Well, the notion of mission funding. I mean, those are things that are an improvement for the organizations that we are supporting, so they can, and it's even simpler for foundations. So it doesn't need to be that complicated. So, you know, an organization is doing some good work, so why not support it for 3 years? So you don't have to report every 6 months. So do you want to have like a very long report that nobody will read anyway, and have a simpler way of keeping them accountable? And there are also networks like, of course, the PFC that are opening the eyes of the peoples, like some like collaboration between peers. So, oh, you had this approach, and how did it work? So we see that it's perfectly possible, because, of course, foundations would be afraid to do advocacy because it would be deemed political. There are ways of doing things, like the climate crisis. People will say it's too complicated. We don't know what to fund. and we can learn from one another to do things differently. I think, for instance, the approach with Aboriginal people, we have conversations with them, so we're part of Partners with Reciprocity, where we can learn between peers and be challenged about our reflection. And in Quebec, we have the Collectif des Fondations Québécoises contre les Inégalités, which is also a network of foundations that developed a very rigorous exercise to look internally. Yes, we receive some public money coming from taxes. So, and what is our position about that? We have a role to play, but if, of course, we want to be serious, we need to examine our practices. And so it's a question of endowment funds and power sharing. So it may come from our partners who will receive more power and tell us we would like to do this or that. So it comes from different directions. I know that Claude wanted to respond quickly, but we will move shortly to the question period. So if you have questions, I invite you to prepare yourselves. There are 2 mics here in the front, so you could even stand and come to the mic if you have a question. Well, 2 short points. You were talking of the trust base in philanthropy. And I like to say that we're a community organization, we're a foundation also, but we need to remain humble. We need to accept and understand that we may understand the situation, but it's improved day after day by the people who are experiencing the concrete situation. When we're talking of advocacy, what I would like you to remember that it's 1,000 voices. So, but you're giving a voice to people who too often are never heard. That's very important. And finally, to conclude on trust, when you're supporting a community organization that's been there for 25 years, well, I think they probably know what they're doing, and they know what's going around. And so it's not a leap of faith that you're taking when you're supporting these kinds of organizations. And this is probably an internal problem we have. And it's not a problem of the organization in front of us. So I invite us to be humble and to trust the organizations with which we're working, and be aware of the power you can give to people who are not heard by our society. What you're saying, Claude, is extremely important. In our strategic plan, we've included the idea that we will give a voice and amplify the voice of our community, and a community foundation should reflect the community in which it's rooted. And we noticed that we were not representative of the diversity of the Montreal community. And what we are trying to do now in an intentional fashion is to develop networks, because we're in interface with the donors and the community organizations, and they themselves have their own networks of donors, but we were not known, we were not accessible, so we're making an effort to go in this direction, but it needs to go through the idea of giving a voice to the people who are voiceless instead of speaking on their behalf and taking a voice that should not be ours. So I'm hopeful that, of course, it will take time to develop such networks, but it is important as a community foundation that we can say our strategic plan goes until 2026. So if in 2026 we cannot say that we are representing the whole Montreal community, it will have been a failure. So after 25 years, we clearly shouldn't be there. when you say that we're not top down, but we really want to be bottom up, well, it requires that you make the effort and meet people in the field, and that's what we're trying to do. And changing also the face of your teams, yes, and we're fortunate because on our team we have a large diversity. People are trusting us enough to come and work with us, and so this opens new perspectives for us. And so we're fortunate to have this kind of diversity on our team. Otherwise, we couldn't go as far as fast. And that's truly, and I'll say it very humbly, so it was there when I came as a CEO. But maybe we were not paying as much attention to diversity in our grants. In spite of that, on our team, there was already a high level of diversity. So now, do you have questions?
But if you want to ask a question in English, you're more than welcome to do so as well. Je vois une personne au micro ici. Oui. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for your presentations. My name is Ricardo, and my question is that very often the organizations that are asking for support to the philanthropic organizations, because of the confrontational situations, we're writing open letters, we are going to the street. We're making all kinds of campaigns that could be outside of their field of expertise because we are trying to be heard by the power. With the elections that we've had, it's all blue, you saw. Except Montreal. Yes, thank you for the hope. My question is, does the philanthropic ecosystem, is it going to come together in a sort of night of long knives to review the constitutional levers so that Montreal would become a country? That would be my first question. And very often in this kind of work, very often to change the color of the sky for, well, the native, black, racialized communities, for the gender diverse communities, the groups that do this kind of work to make our organizations Jedi, very often they're alienated. They're alienated by those organizations because they make decisions about what is concerning them. These organizations will be deemed too radical, but they're aware of the importance of the urgency of these changes. So how can we revisit the long practice of exclusion of communities that are directly concerned? And we have taught they have the expertise. What commitment are you going to make to radically to the root causes and change certain ways of doing things? So that will be a first question. And in conclusion, yes, very often the communities are in a triangle where they are victims, saviors, and they are also the punishers or the executioners. So in the commentary of the Ministry of immigration seemed to be the problem. Even the philanthropic organization is not seen as an executioner, but as a savior. But at times it was even presented like victims, so we should protect them, we should recognize their good intentions. Maybe you weren't there yesterday, but these kind of things were said yesterday on this forum. So to what extent are you ready to live the level of anxiety by the communities that are directly concerned? So are you ready in your own circles, in your foundations, and you have very high levers? You're even meeting people who are potential ministers. Not everyone in our groups can meet potential ministers. What are you ready to do to change this?
Réagir tout de suite.
I think you want to go first.
I won't be talking about the independence of Montreal. Well, thank you for your comment. What can we do? Well, one, I don't see myself as leading an organization that sees itself as a savior. I think we are partners, and I think this is our first stance. It should be our first stance when we work in Montreal neighborhoods with various communities. We are partners. We're here to learn and to help people reach their aspirations. And you're Ricardo? Okay. Well, in our organization, we do precisely what you described. We are at the service of populations. It's very clear. As regarding organizations, we have launched an EDI undertaking a few years back. Our board of directors is now representative, hiring-wise, and there's a lot of catching up that has been done. We're far more representative of the Montreal community now, and we want to go even further. We have training and enterprise-wide to find the necessary openness and stance, and we are challenging things. We deal with the matter of microaggression. We want for people to understand precisely in what environment they are involving, and this is work that we do daily. Are we good? Well, I would say we're not too bad, and we keep improving daily, and it is our focus at our organization. I think in Ricardo's question, one of the things that I'm hearing, and it comes back to what we were saying earlier, why? That's what I want you to tell me. Why are things starting to change in Montreal, and why now we are not in the same discourse as 5 years ago? Some people exerted pressure for that. I understand that some changes were done internally, but some things came from outside as well. And what are the relations that you have with people who have exerted for those pressures, for those changes? There are a good cop, bad cop dynamics here. People are trying to push the philanthropic sector to evolve, and they're identified as a bad cop, and finding the good cop is not the one who truly put forward various ideas since the beginning. And it leads to complicated relations with communities. How do you navigate through these relations? I don't know if I'll be able to answer your question. You know, full disclosure, Ricardo and myself exchange emails once in a while. And over the weekend, we exchanged about our mutual frustrations regarding the scandalous declaration of the immigration minister last week that was reelected almost unanimously by absolutely everyone. I come from a militant sector. There were the militants who were receivable by ministers and the militants on the other side of the street with their megaphone, you know, and one friend is now Minister of the Environment at the federal level. There's always this tension, and the issue that we have in philanthropy, in my opinion, is that philanthropy is attracted by those who are not as risky. And I think that's what you were alluding to, Ricardo, the idea that at some point in time, the one that uses the megaphone, the one who needs support, you know, that support mustn't muzzle them. That will stifle the person. So there is a balance to be found here. I think that the last thing that philanthropy must do is to say, oh, they're not talkable, I won't be listening to them. And to say, oh, they're winners and they're losers, I won't fund them. And after that, we have to take a look at ourselves in the mirror. The philanthropic sector has a great legitimacy with decision makers because we have the power of money behind us. And we are a sector that is viewed as being reasonable, credible from decision makers. So when issues come up, very important issues, and the philanthropy sector remains silent, that silence serves the status quo. It is a conversation that I had with Chris Archie from the Circle, and we were talking about reconciliation, and I was saying, listen, I was hesitant. I didn't quite know how to behave. I was afraid of making a mistake, but that fear of making a mistake, who does it serve and what does it serve? And then I understood that when I am afraid of making a mistake and I act cautiously, I'm not doing anything. And by doing not anything, I reinforce the status quo. I think that's the silence from the philanthropic sector sometimes on issues like the climate crisis. It's literally the lives of our children that's at stake, not in 200 years, my children in their lives. And we don't really talk about it. We look at it from afar because it's political and it's polarizing. Yes, but I mean, if we've implemented things in our mission, our vision, and our values, and we're not even able to talk about it because we think it's polarizing, it means that some people just have to polarize an issue to muzzle us. And the fact that we're silent after is such that people who are seeking equity, I'm thinking about climate issues with youths, but it could be indigenous issues, racial issues. Those people do not find in us an ally that they could have. And it doesn't mean to start moving around with a megaphone. We have a different role to play. We don't want to use the path of others. However, when we talk and when we say, okay, here are the values that we want to defend, the societal values that we want to defend, I mean, it will be received by decision makers, and this will legitimize even further the voices of those on the street. By not acting, by being silent right now, we are legitimating the status quo. I don't think that's what we want to do. So we're saying that it shouldn't work like that, but it is working like that. Well, the message, the signal that we are conveying is that, oh, it's too controversial, I won't touch it. Yeah, that's it. I see there's another hand raised. Yes, good morning, everyone. It's not really a question, but I'll take a few minutes of your time. My name is Stéphanie Germain. I'm an acceptable militant because I'm amongst you here because of Sylvie Trottier, amongst others, who is present on the panel today. I'd like to take this opportunity. I don't know if I'll be re-invited afterwards, so I'm doing this because I know that there are big ears here who will listen to me, and beyond that, they might be able to act, because I can smell power in the room. So here it goes. We talked very much about the matter of immigration these past few days. And, of course, it was on everybody's mind, given the political arena. What I think is that the matter of immigration is intimately related to environmental issues and climate justice. Why? Well, parents of Black, Indigenous, racialized youths who die because they were shot in our neighborhoods, those youths, for me, are the future of our planet. When we talk about environmental issues and climate justice, we have to think about the youths in our communities that are dying now for many years, almost in all indifference. The philanthropy sector is active and was able to show advocacy to increase awareness at diverse government levels regarding the climate crisis. I'm expecting the same thing for the lives of young Blacks, Indigenous, and racialized youths that are dying because they're being shot. They are dying almost daily, and it doesn't seem to be perceived as being an urgent issue, but I believe deeply that the sector of philanthropy can act and have things moving at all levels. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the youth in our communities are not like trees. When they die, we cannot replant them. We cannot plant other youths like we can do with firearms, and their roots die forever. And if youths in our community keep on dying in indifference and inaction, isn't it our planet that is dying every day? The matter of violence has to be seen as a public health issue and not only as public safety issue. How go about this? By centralizing the voice of families that are directly concerned by systemic violence issues. And the voices of those families must be even more centralized in the public space in their conversations and in places like the one today. I will tell you the story of René Cassius, who just lost his son in Montreal now. Business Cassis was my assistant when I was young. I arrived here when I was 5. I'm an immigrant, but I work and I speak French. I live in Montreal. It was not my choice. I'm talking about René de Cassis because I grew up in the HLM of Montreal North, the most impoverished place that was made poor these past few years in Canada. René was supposed to take care of 150 youths in these low housing centers. René Cassis all his life took care of the youths in the community, so that today, a month ago, she loses her only son due to a firearm. When will the voices of the mothers and families will be heard, will be centralized? I heard you. You talked about the future of your children. Well, this moves me because when you talk about the future of your children and justice, it makes me think about the future of our communities that do not have the same color of your kids. And if we want to talk about climate justice, environmental justice, we'll have to talk about other injustices at a different level because the lives of youth is important and it's time for things to change, and it is as urgent as the climate emergency. Thank you. I'll start by saying that, Stephanie, you're making me cry. What's happening is important at 2 levels. What Stephanie has just said and the fact that you start by saying that you're not sure if you'll be re-invited, but you've just told the truth. You've told important truths that are very much welcome in this room. So not only you won't be ejected from the room, and it's important to say how welcome your story is in this room. Thank you so much for this intervention. And there were a lot of questions. There was not only a single question. Maybe Claude, given Centraide's commitment throughout the city, including to support organizations, we're talking about this youth in Montréal now, what are the actions that happen at Centraide specifically to better support the community organizations? And earlier we were talking about collaboration and what are the conversations you have access to promote the action of the various government levels regarding firearms and the climate crisis and the public health issue. Thank you very much. I embraced the matter of public health and public safety. That's a given. We have a meeting this week. We'll improve the funding of community organizations for street work to make sure that we are more present. Some work is being done at the community level. Here again, it's to understand what communities need and to meet their needs. So definitely, we already do that type of funding at Centraide, and we'll work very hard in order to increase our funding, that's one, and get at additional funding with the various public organizations in order to support them and that nobody falls through the cracks. Someone wants to react more specifically to this question, to talk specifically to the families. Can the philanthropy sector be in contact more directly with the individuals who are experiencing such a reality? Well, I've heard 2 things here. Yes, to come into contact with families and provide them with more voice. I think that we could work at this, indeed. And we've had exchanges with Ricardo on this. We have to find the proper way to do this. So the idea is not to substitute ourselves. We were talking about amplifying voices. I think that these voices must be amplified because the only time the Quebec Premier reacted is when a white person was murdered in broad daylight. That's the elephant in the room. So there's stigma here. And earlier, I was saying that if we remain silent on such issues, we are accomplices in some way. I think that right now, it's, people say we'll hire more police officers. Who does it reassure? People who say, well, listen, there's a disorder in the streets, but they're not the ones losing their kids. I see this with great humility, and I hope that the fact that I'm often raising the matter of climate crisis is being interpreted as the fact that I'm not interested in the stress and even more urgent problematic problems that people are experiencing today. Unfortunately, we are in a world today where there are numerous crises at the same time, and we try to face these crises without changing a thing to the system in which we live. So we're putting plasters on fractures, Band-Aids on fractures, and we went through an electoral campaign that has aggravated these fractures. And it's interesting, we're talking about Montreal. In Montreal, maybe we have the capacity to come together and to define together another way of living together that is not the one that was introduced to us. And we don't want to see those communities fall through the cracks, those who see youths being murdered in the street. Sylvie, the last word. I think that you've said it all in a very eloquent way, in a very urgent way, and I think that this call is being heard by everyone in the room. There are many different ideas on which I would like to react. One, the matter of risk. We often talk, I talked about that. In philanthropy, we're afraid of taking risks because it's too political, it's controversial, it's too radical. We don't want to do those things. But if we want to change things deeply to really have a more just world, everybody wants a sustainable life with dignity. We have to take those risks because if we don't do so, the risk is far greater. It will be the status quo forever. And the status quo wants to be there. He's well there. It's very easy to keep up with our habits, to not change things in depth. All of our systems are there for status quo. The system is doing it in itself. It wants to survive. So we want to hit hard to change things. And when we're talking about risks, we don't really have any risks. And foundations will be okay. Maybe Revenue Canada Agency will do something. That's the biggest risk. But the biggest risk, for families in Montreal North, it's a matter of life or death. That's a true risk. We have to hear this. We have to listen to this. I think we can have an impact and change the way in which we work and integrate these voices, because if we don't, we'll never resolve issues. The people who experience these issues know the solutions better than us. It's clear. It's obvious. And it's as urgent. The elections were yesterday, and we are realizing that I'm living in a bubble in Montreal, and there's also a narrative crisis, the rise of the right, populism, and the immigrants are the problem to everything, and that flies. We have a role to play in these narrative and the media to see what we're really talking about. I have trouble understanding how we got here when we go through these crises. There's a disconnect here, so I think we can do more here. And it's important to have many different tactics, not to be afraid to support people who are considered as being radical. We're asking for in-depth change. There's the inside game, the outside game. We need all approaches, all tools. So many things can be used by foundations. It can become strengths. So we have to move out of our traditional parameters. That's it. I could talk about this at length, you know. It's already a lot. Thank you. There's something that you've said that's most important. Maybe that will be our conclusion. It is one of the conversations we had in order to prepare for this panel. How do we bring the philanthropic sector to be more, less risk-averse? And I believe that you've just put your finger on it. The risks that we're talking for the philanthropic sector, you know, is an inquiry by the CRA or something of the sort. It's not the same type of risk that we're talking about in the communities when we're talking about a matter of life and death, like Stephanie reminded us, or the future of the planet, or intergenerational trauma, and so on. So I believe that we have to remember when we talk about our risks, what are the risks that are experienced by the communities. Maybe it could be a recipe to give ourselves courage and move things forward. I can see there is progress in the sector in Montreal. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation, this discussion. Will now conclude for the time being. And of course, panel members are available. If you have more questions, you can go talk to them during lunch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to lists. Oh man, I was making notes throughout that, and they're all over the page. So please bear with me while I sort of sort through some of this. It's really wonderful as well to hear. To come to Montreal and hear, you know, some specific lens to what's happening in this local environment, and hearing so much resonance to, I know what's happening elsewhere in the country too, which is comforting and disturbing at the same time. So, and a lot of, I want to really, you know, thank you for bringing your truth into the room as well. For both of you who spoke, I think. A lot of it resonated to Plenary 2 yesterday, conversations around around risk, around threatening, whose comfort are we prioritizing in the work that we do, and the embracing of discomfort in the necessity of that to bring about change, that silence is reinforcing the status quo. That's really sitting with me, and addressing that you know, that say-do gap that Vinod talked about yesterday, because we spend a lot of time talking about this, and it doesn't mean anything unless that moves into action. With all that said, I'm now going to talk about lunch. It's a weird transition. Anyway, Claude, I just want to say we miss you on the board. Your sense of humor is one of a kind. I also want to say, can we have a huge round of applause to the interpreters as well, please? I listened to that entire session. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm from Calgary. My French is not good enough to follow along, and it's incredible to it's an incredible skill set that I'm immensely in awe of. So thank you for supporting so many of us through this conference. Also, Karel and I spent some time together as part of the PFC Jedi Accelerator. And I remember in one of the sessions when he asked, why would our endowment be driven by a different set of values than our operations? And that quote really resonated with me in the session, and your sort of re-articulation around that today around 100% of the dollars must support the cause, I think is a great challenge to aspire to. You know, conversations around like, it's an unfortunate reality of the system that we live in, that you know, money is often power, and putting that to use to bring about the change in the world in every avenue possible is important work. Anyway, we are almost at the end of our time together, but as they say in the infomercial, but wait, there's more. So I do want to apologize in advance for my Calgary French. I'm working. I've got like 600 straight days on Duolingo, but when I need to say more than "j'aime la confiture," things get complicated. So I will say le déjeuner sera bientôt.
Le lunch sera bientôt disponible. Nous vous invitons. Invite you to come back to the plenary for this lunch.
English, there are boxed lunches available outside of the room, and you're welcome to bring your lunch back inside of the room for a very special session. What is this special session, you ask? Well, let me tell you. The one and only Hilary Pearson, many of us know, will provide an insider's perspective on the ways that foundations are evolving and the varied roles they play as conveners, advocates, brokers, or partners. That will be happening inside this room over lunch. She will be joined by Michael Alberg-Sabarik of Wider Sense, a Berlin-based consultancy who will provide his own perspective on some of the similar changes occurring in European philanthropy. And here's an insider tip. Rumor has it this might be a glimpse into a pretty interesting book that's launching at the end of November. Ooh, okay. For those of you who want to network instead, feel free to find another place in the Palais to lunch with your boxed lunches. Also, after lunch, there will be a gathering specifically for Black, Indigenous, and racialized participants involved in philanthropic organizations. It's getting dry. This is the first of these dialogue series, which will feature 4 inspiring leaders in philanthropy and provide an opportunity for discussion and networking. If you are going to a site visit this afternoon, please go to registration. You all know where that is. I just pointed anyway. Promptly at 1:45, transportation will leave at 2 o'clock. I'll be attending the trip to Centre Saint-Jacques to see the circus, and I could not be more excited. Here's some more French. It's going to get dicey.
I hope that you have enjoyed Montreal, the conference, your colleagues, and that you have made new friendships and strengthened former ties, and that you feel inspired and full of energy by the important work done by our sector.
Oh, thank you. This is my commitment. I'll be better by next year. Finally, please join me in thanking once again all of our generous partners and donors, the TD Ready Commitment, RBC, the Jaroslavsky Fraser, Fondation Lucie et André Chagnon, Suncor Energy Foundation, the Morris and Rosalind Goodman Family Foundation, Ashoka Canada, and KBF Canada. Please give them a hand. Also, a big thank you to Future of Good and The Philanthropist as their support as media partners. And I want to give a huge, huge, huge shout out to Inez, Erica, the entire PFC staff for putting this conference together. It is, they were getting here at ridiculous hours in the morning to make sure that everything ran, and it's been going on for a long time. So I hope you all get a well-deserved rest after this. That's it from me. I wish you a great rest of your day, and we look forward to continuing to work, collaborate, and learn together. Au revoir et bon fin de journée.
Goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.